this commenter, he says propositions, and I was talking to Leighton at the time in the clip, talking about the weakness of propositionally normative labels, and people are constantly mishearing what we are saying when it comes to how we talk about propositions. Okay, so I want to show you these comments here, and then I'll show you my answer, and we'll talk about the 4 kinds of knowing and propositional knowing specifically in this session, because it's very important to understand how this kind of thing works. This guy says propositions help people by being clear. So what is the alternative? Magic, mystical experiences, intuitions? Whose experiences? Whose intuitions? And this guy, that's, people just automatically go to this. People are living in a world created by their left hemisphere, and it's been reduced to something that they can apprehend, and they are not comprehending the world, neither are they interacting with the world. The world does not come to us wrapped in a language, okay? You know, think about monkeys and cats and flowers, and they don't come speaking a language, okay? Well, semantic language like we use is unique to humans, and it is one of the greatest advantages that we have over the animals, but it also provides one of the greatest areas of deception that we can have as well. And so there's this prevailing misunderstanding of when we are talking about propositions, and so I want to very much clear this up. And he says it's been argued that the only kind of knowledge that God can have is propositional, since God does not have a body and is omnipresent. And then he's saying claims of attunement. How about knowledge by acquaintance, optimal grip? How about phenomenal and acquaintance? And he goes and he's like, why all the buzzwords? I'm like, what do you mean the buzzwords? We're constantly trying to raise our level of articulation and resolution with which we speak around here. So I have a vocabulary list on my phone that I keep in a folder, in a shared folder, so I can see it on all my devices, and I regularly review my vocabulary words so that the deal is this: I have things that I'm trying to communicate that I do not feel like I can adequately communicate. So every time I come across a concept, word, phrase, or idea that I think helps me communicate what I'm already trying to say better, I try to incorporate that into what I'm trying to say. Okay, I try to bring that in so that we can say things that are commensurate with the things that are trying to be said. Okay, so it's not really buzzwords. And this guy says Kevin uses big words that he does not understand. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I understand them. I said, I apparently use words that you don't understand, but I avoid words that I don't understand. The vocabulary that I employ is a result of a very slow, intentional, and tedious attempt to raise my level of articulation and resolution to be commensurate with the content that is trying to come out through me. That's the attempt that I'm underway here, that is underway. I do not take words lightly or use them flippantly. As a matter of fact, today we're going to talk about why we don't do that. There's a lot of deliberation behind why I employ the words that I do and phrases that I do. All that being said, my wife has a knack for clarity and brevity that I lack, and I often also strive to be more like her in that regard. So I'm not claiming to do anything perfect or anything like that. What I'm letting you know is that I'm constantly trying to explain at a level that's commensurate with the phenomenology that's being experienced, and I feel like the words always fall short. So I'm always attempting to tune up the words to match the thing that's trying to be said. That's what I'm trying to do, and eventually you keep doing this, and you wind up diverging from people who aren't trying to do this. And I don't think that's my fault. I put everything out there in public. Anybody's welcome to follow along. But we are where we are. I have to speak about things from where I am with things, not from where other people are with things. And I hope you understand that. Now I want to go to, let's look at the 4 kinds of knowing, and let's look kind of how they relate to each other. And if you're familiar with the channel, you're familiar with this stuff. If you're not, then this would be a good review. So the deepest kind of knowing is participatory knowing, okay? These are claims on attunement with the arena. The more participatory knowing you have, the more agency arena attunement that you have. You think babies come out first. Babies learn how to participate with those around them before they learn to speak, okay? And then speech gets assigned to participatory components, okay? You get a label for mom, a label for dad, a label for walk, a label for eat, a label for food, for broccoli, for dirty diaper. You get labels for all these things. Okay. But the things come first. And then the labels would mean nothing if there was no participatory knowledge with which to associate the labels. The kid interacts with mom and dad for a while before the labels mom and dad come to be associated with those people. Okay? So participation is deeper. And the things that we name things, those are just signifiers that signify different things. And then there's perspectival knowing. What's it like to be me from where I am? This is claim on having an optimal grip in the scenario and in the context. Like if you're in a baseball game, what's the perspectival? This is where, by the way, this is where episodic memory in your brain is stored. These three, the bottom, the 2, 3, and 4 are stored. They actually have different places in your brain where they are stored. And perspectival knowledge is episodic memory, is how that is stored in your brain. You have an episode of, say, going to a baseball game. Well, are you one of the fans? Are you sitting in the crowd? Are you cheering? Are you eating a hot dog? Are you behind a guy with a big hat that you can't see through? That's your perspective. Are you the left fielder? Are you the shortstop? Are you the second baseman? Are you the catcher? Are you the batter? You see? So all those would be different perspectival knowings. You could take someone like on the Saints. I constantly mention this guy, like Taysom Hill is not the best at any one position, but he has the best attunement at the highest conglomeration of positions, the highest aggregation of positions. So he can play quarterback, he can block punts, he can do a kickoff return. He's played just about every position that can be played. So he has and he can do it very well at the level of a professional. So he has the highest level of agency arena attunement, where any other player might be better in their particular field most of the time, but they are more specialized and they have less agency arena attunement. And you would not want to bring football skills and equipment and activities into, say, a tennis court. Okay, there would be an agency arena mismatch. So you need to know what you're there for, what you're there to do. So, and then there's procedural knowing. How do I do something? How do I throw a baseball? How do I hit the baseball? How do I pass a law through Congress? How do I dissect a mouse? Okay, how do I do something? And then there's propositional knowing. And the procedural knowing is claims on capacity or power. It's something I can do. I can operate a forklift, therefore I qualify for this job, that kind of thing. I can do this thing. So then there's and procedural knowing is stored in your procedural memory. And there are patients who have Alzheimer's and all kinds of things who they can't remember their name or who their niece is, but you sit them down at a piano and they can play Tchaikovsky perfectly, okay? So sometimes they have procedural memory stored in a different place than some of their other kinds of memory. And then there's propositional knowing, and that's the words that we use, a claim on a truth and semantically disambiguated truths. And so I would say, well, that is a cat. That is a cat. That is a propositional statement. Or you say cats are mammals, okay, something like that. And then if I'm going to disambiguate that, say, well, a dog is a mammal too. Well, here's the difference between dogs and cats. There's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences. So then we semantically disambiguate what those things are. And that semantic disambiguation is a list of component descriptions that make the thing distinct from something else. So when I'm talking about semantically disambiguated propositions, I am constantly talking about the difference, like, between this kind of theology and this kind of theology. It's the same kind of thing, okay? But I can semantically disambiguate it. I might have a long-hair tabby cat, or I might have a domestic short-hair cat. They're very, very similar, but through words I can semantically disambiguate what is different about them. But those words also point to literal physical differences in those kinds of cats. Okay, I'm not a cat expert, so I'm not going to go any further than that. I have a cat, but I'm not a cat expert, so I'm not going to go any further than that. But you can imagine, I'm hoping you can understand this kind of thing. Propositional knowing is stored in the semantic memory, is what they call it, in the brain, where propositional knowledge is stored, how you remember what things are called, okay? Now, propositions, somebody said in the comment that we read at the beginning, this guy says, propositions help people by being clear. Not if you don't speak the language. They have the potential to help people by being clear, but they also have the potential to very much mislead. You ever heard of a lie? You ever heard of fiction? Okay. You ever heard of inaccurate journalism? Propositions, they have the capacity, if they are accurate. Okay, so let's look at what propositions do. Let's look at the role that propositions have. Proposition is the currency of the four kinds of knowing. What that means is the real knowing is procedural. The real knowing is perspectival. The real knowing is participatory. Think about all the people who can do many same things, but maybe one of them speaks English, or one of them speaks Chinese, or one of them speaks Hangul, or one of them speaks, Farsi or something. They can all go in and operate, and the doctors can all go in the operating room and operate, and the people who work in the oil industry can go pump the oil. You know what I'm saying? They all do the same things, but they have all these different verbal pointers, semantic pointers toward the things. So the semantic pointers toward the things are very helpful for coordination, but they are not the things. And if you swap out those semantic pointers for different ones, it works just as well, as long as everybody agrees on what they are. We're not going to call this oil anymore. We're going to call it that. We're not going to call it a cat. We're going to call it a gato. We're not going to call it a mouth. We're going to call it a boca. We're not going to say reconcile. We're going to say lambano or something. Or it's a different word. What is the word for reconciled? Lambano is received, I think. Or draw for elko or elkuo, or suro for more forcefully drawing. You got to agree on what they are. So if I start rattling off a bunch of biblical Greek, a lot of people probably wouldn't follow along because there's no agreement on what those point to. Okay, so there has to be agreement on what the propositions point to. Propositional knowing is like the currency of knowledge. I'm sitting in a house right now. Buying the house with money, but I cannot live in the money. Okay, the money doesn't have walls and a roof and running water and electricity. The house does. Even though the house is fungible for money, the house is not the money. And for people to think that propositions are the thing, they're confusing the goods and services for what's supposed to point to them. People go to the grocery store and they think they're losing money when they buy all the stuff, but the real wealth, you just put that in your grocery cart and walked out with it. You just gained something. The money, you can't eat the money. You can eat the groceries. See? So we kind of have backwards thinking on some of these things. Money is one of the things that's a shared fiction. There's nothing intrinsically about the money that makes it valuable to us, except we both agree to the fiction that it makes it valuable to us. Okay, we have now in the United States, we have what's called fiat currency. It used to be tied to a gold standard. It's not tied to a gold standard anymore. It is now tied to, essentially the idea is that it's fungible for goods and services, but it is only that to the degree that we agree that it is. Okay, if somebody doesn't want money, well, you can't use money to get what they have, or maybe something can't be sold. Like, this is my grandmother's ring. I'm not going to sell it to anybody. So there's nothing that's fungible for it. Okay, so money is, and that would be like an example of something that's ineffable. Paul talks about things that were unlawful to utter, and perhaps there's just things that for which words and language aren't suited. Because remember, reality does not come to us wrapped in any kind of language. Okay, so if we were going to have a label for some kind of theological approach to things, what you would want to have is a label that is characterized by these three: participatory, perspectival, and procedural, not propositionally normative. Propositionally normative labels like Calvinism, provisionism, free grace, dispensationalism, mid-acts dispensationalism, they're all the same. Okay, they're propositionally normative. I can line up a bunch of propositions in a book like this, and then that defines the system. Doesn't matter how you got there. And that's one of the big problems with it. So people can come along and they can affirm alignment with that set of propositions, never having arrived at them through any kind of proper procedure, which constitutes a lie. It's a functional lie. Even if the propositions are true, it's a functional lie because they have not gone through the process to verify that they are true. So they're agreeing that they point to all these things.